Today is September 24th, 2015. It was exactly 42 years ago today that one of the most heinous crimes ever perpetrated in the state of Wyoming occurred at this very spot. A desolate span of iron and steel located 40 miles outside of town. 18-year-old Becky Thomson and her 11-year-old sister Amy Burridge were abducted at knife point and driven here. Becky was raped. Both were brutalized and thrown off of the bridge to meet their destiny 150 feet below. Despite critical injuries, Becky somehow survived and managed to crawl out of the canyon the next morning. I didn't know them. Becky was 3 years ahead of me in school. But I remember that after that night, things were never the same in Casper, Wyoming. The thought that something like this could never happen in our town vanished. We lost our innocence, and it never returned.
I was coming back from my tour of duty in the Middle East after 9/11. Where I was writing for the Denver Post about all those questions we had after 9/11. It was on my way home that I picked up a French news magazine on the airplane, and I don't read French, so I was luckily just looking at pictures, and one of the pictures that was printed in this magazine was of two people plunging from the World Trade Center holding hands. And it wasn't a picture. I'd left the United States so quickly after 9/11, a lot of that coverage I never saw. But there in the dark of that cabin over the Atlantic, something happened and my brain just sort of twisted over into the story of these two friends of mine, next door neighbors, growing up in Casper, Wyoming, who were abducted and terrorized through the night and taken to a bridge in the middle of nowhere and ultimately thrown off of it. They were thrown off at different moments, but in my imagination, they held hands as they went down. It brought into focus a little more of the ripple effect that one event can have. We knew at that moment that we would live with the ripple effects of 9/11, of course, for the rest of our lives, and that would go into possibly the next generation or two or three, who knows, but certainly for our lives. This event in Casper, Wyoming in 1973 was that kind of an event. It sent forth a ripple an echo that reverberates through community, through a place, through time, across generations. And in exploring that, I felt like I was going to get a greater understanding of how humans deal with trauma and with memory and with all the difficult things that throw themselves in our paths as we go. And in this story of two young girls, two innocent young girls, who are snatched by a couple of local thugs and essentially murdered on that night, I felt we had a bigger story to tell, and so I pursued it, and The Darkest Night is the product. I came to Casper very young and went to school here. We grew up like so many of us were privileged to grow up in this place where you could run free, and there were more kids around than you could possibly play with in a lifetime, and where even trouble wasn't that troubling. And actually didn't want the place to change, and the place doesn't change until we see the events of Fremont Canyon Bridge.
Well, I was on the police department in, I believe it was 1973, in September. And when I came to work that morning, we got a report of the 2 missing girls, and myself and another investigator, Ernie Johnson, went and interviewed some of the family and found out what was happening. We found their car. Their car was located at what was a convenience store at 12th and Melrose, and it had a flat tire. And that's all we knew at that time about what might have happened with the girls. We started canvassing the neighborhood, and we got no response from any of the neighbors. They hadn't seen anything, nor did the store clerk. But later, as we were working the neighborhoods, we got a call that a girl had been found by Pathfinder Bridge, which would be Fremont Canyon Bridge between Alcova and Fremont Canyon. And it was said that she was one of the girls that was missing. She was thrown off the bridge and left there to die. She stayed down in the canyon all night because she was afraid that abductors were still up on the bridge. She was able to crawl out of the canyon. At the hospital, she was interviewed by another detective, Dick Fields, and he garnered the name of the suspects out of her. He was able to put some things together on who abducted her, which were Kennedy and Jenkins. The girls went into the store, and when they came out, they had a flat tire. And these 2 guys on the parking lot, Kennedy and Jenkins, offered to help them, and they didn't have a spare tire, so he said, well, we'll take you home. Well, instead, they took them for a ride and terrorized them all the way out to Fremont Canyon. In fact, Kennedy had a knife, and he kept jamming it in the back of the seat and tearing the seat cover with it. So, and Becky was very kind and would go with anybody, and she just didn't want, she begged them not to hurt her sister, which they did. We sent other officers of the sheriff's office out to the canyon, and they went out with a diver, and they found Amy. She was underwater. She had died. She had hit a rock. And later that morning, we were looking for the 2 suspects, and they had found one of them in North Casper by a laundry and arrested him. That was Jerry Jenkins. And they said that they didn't know where Kennedy was, but they knew what he was driving. So I was heading north on Center Street and going toward North Casper, and here came the vehicle with Kennedy driving it. So I turned around and followed it down Center Street, and there were other police cars in the area, and they were racing toward North Casper. In fact, they went right by me. I was in a plain unmarked car. But at the stoplight at B and Center Street, I jumped out and arrested Kennedy, took him out of his car and arrested him. And he was transported to the police station then, and we took his car in for evidence. It was the same car that was used in the abduction, and it had some physical marks inside of it and some evidence inside of it from the abduction. And he was questioned and denied everything.
I didn't understand death when this happened. I mean, Casper of the moment was a free place. It was, for a child, unfettered. You could go anywhere, anytime, riding our bikes up and down the streets at all times of the day or night. The place felt innocent. And now the fact that I'm, a 16-year-old boy at the time, Amy and Becky lived next door to me, it's suddenly a personal story when we hear what has happened. But no matter who you talk to who was here at that time, particularly kids, they talk about how their world suddenly became more closed, became locked down, that rules were suddenly put in place that had never been there before. There was a lot of fear. Parents were shocked, as you can imagine. So it was that transformative thing for so many people.
We didn't think things like that would happen here in Casper, especially in that year. After that, people were a little more cautious. They were talking to their children a little more about being around strangers. The girls would have been okay if they had just called home and said, "Hey, come and get us. We have a flat tire." But they were so trusting and that's the way it was then. Everybody was trusting. Suspects went to court, and their court trial was in Cheyenne because they had a change of venue, and they were found guilty, and they were sentenced to death. However, it was on the exact same day a year later that they were sentenced. But Wyoming, in the meantime, after that, had done away with the death penalty at that time. So they escaped death. They perpetrated the crime, and they tried to get rid of the evidence. It was just sheer luck that Becky hit the edge of that rock, and it threw her out into the middle of that stream, Fremont Canyon. Otherwise, she would have been with her sister, and we had no clues, as we would have had no clues as to who would have done this. Becky went on with her life as best she could. She had a lot of hard times because her sister died, and she felt bad, that her sister died and she lived. But she went on. She had some, psychological problems, but she was really a great person. And she eventually married and had a child, and things were going, pretty well, except every year that it would come up for these two guys to be paroled, and they had to answer to that every year, which brought it all back again.
On July 31st, 1992, Becky returned here for the first time since that horrific night nearly 20 years before. No one knows if she got too close to the edge and fell, or if she deliberately jumped. All we do know is that Becky Thomson died a second time that night.
The day she went 20 years later to the canyon with her friend and her daughter, she And I don't know if she fell off or if she jumped off, but I know I went out there, and when I was told, and I knew it was her because I could see she had real long brown hair, and I could see the hair in the water.
When the book launched, we did a book signing here, and we had hundreds of people coming. I would sign books and talk a little bit with the people as they passed through. And I started to notice a lot of teenagers and 20-somethings buying the book and getting a signature. And I began to ask, why are you buying this book? This happened long before you were born. And they would say, my mom would tell me, or my dad would tell me, and they used it as a sort of cautionary tale, this sort of dark fairy tale, almost as a lesson. You know, you're going to go out tonight? Well, let me tell you this story about these two girls who went out one night. That it exists in our mythology is important. As people come and go from Casper, we'll lose some of that mythology, we'll lose some of the memory. But I think that it will always, there will always be a remnant of it. There will always be a ghost of it here. And I think it will exist in that form as a cautionary tale, not as a true crime story, not as a nasty little dirty story that you get to tell around the campfire, but really as a cautionary tale. It wasn't a plan on the 30th anniversary. I just happened to be here doing research on what would have been the 30th anniversary. I happened to check the weather for that date in the papers that I was researching, and I saw the temperatures had been cold, the cloudiness. It was a completely clear night, but there was also no moon. It occurred to me that the weather at the moment was similar, so I started to look deeper and saw that the forecast was for exactly the same conditions as that night, and that in literally kind of an hour before dark, I decided I was going to spend the night out there, and I was going to do it in roughly similar conditions that Becky would have been down there in that canyon. So I just went out there in a shirt and Levi's, but I wore boots. Other than that, I didn't clothe myself. I wanted to experience the cold of that night. Even so, I experienced it slightly more clothed than she was because she was half naked. I had spent, by that time, I had spent a lot of nights on the ground in Afghanistan, in Beirut, doing war correspondency, and that was by far the most nervous, difficult, and restless night I'd ever spent in my life, to this day. It was freezing. It was the temperature got down to freezing, but my body's reaction was to more than the cold, and I started shivering not long after sunset, and didn't finish until the next morning when I climbed out of that canyon. And again, I climbed out with the use of all my limbs, and Becky, of course, didn't. She had to get out there in a miraculous sort of painful way. I think that that experience was just essential to telling the story, essential to understanding her. Overnight, there was this effect that I hadn't known about until after that night when I had a chance to research it. But we know that Becky, she told people that she stayed down there praying for the dawn to come, and how it never felt like it had come, like the night had stopped. Her watch, she wasn't wearing a watch, or it had stopped or something. In the middle of the night, my watch stopped. It stopped working and I couldn't tell the time. And so I found myself, like Becky, just wanting the dawn to hurry. And in time, I could tell the sky was lightening up. And I got hope from that. I found, I felt like I'd survived. You know, I wasn't down there in any danger, but I felt like I'd survived, and I'd felt hope welling up in me. Well, what I discovered later was, well, this light never seemed to get lighter, and for it seemed hours it was just the same, but I said, but the sky is lighter. Later I find out that there's an effect that happens very briefly in the fall called false dawn, and that's what it was. The sky was actually being illuminated by the Milky Way, and it only happens during a very brief period. So she would have experienced that as I did, and it would have given her this false hope. And in the book I talk about it as just another of the betrayals that she suffered in her life, starting with that night. It gave me a sense of the story that I couldn't have gotten by just reading reports or even just interviewing people. I had to go get my boots on the ground and experience it. One of the elements of the story that became most important to me was interviewing the surviving killer, Ron Kennedy. I thought I hated him, but the path I chose in my life was to be a journalist. And to be a good journalist in my day meant that you separated yourself from emotions like hate and love and fear to tell a story. To interview Ron Kennedy and to hate him at the same time would be wrong. It would be not only unethical and it was just antithetical to what I believed. So it became important. It became very important to me to tell his story, and I did that. Now, the fact that he chose to tell me the stories that he told me are on him. That's not my responsibility, and that he chose to tell stories that were fantastic and literally incredible was his choice. But I told them the way he told me, and I kept my promise to him that I would tell the stories he told me. He had a certain country boy charm about him. Clearly, he's a sociopath. He's manipulative, but in sometimes I found myself liking him. I found myself sharing some of the recollections about Casper. You know, he grew up here, so that we already share a certain weird DNA. We all grew up here. He's one of us. I was protected through the whole process by being a journalist. You know, I had spent, you know, by that time, all of my life, it seems, as being a journalist. And so I was able to draw that curtain down and deal with it from a safe distance. The only time that became difficult was when I was reading the trial transcripts in the courthouse in Cheyenne. And there were references in the transcripts repeatedly to a map. And I wanted to see this map that had been drawn in the courtroom. I was leaving for lunch and I asked the court clerk if I could see that. She said I could. It was still with the evidence. When I came back from lunch, in the room, my little research room, were 2 or 3 big boxes. I knew this was more than a map. I knew this was the evidence in this case. It was to me, really was a Pandora's box. I didn't know what I was going to see. I didn't know how I would react to it. And like I say, the journalist said, "But you have to see it." And the 16-year-old boy says, "But you don't want to see it." Indeed, I opened it, and there were items, collected from the cars. It was the knife that was used to get the girls, to abduct the girls. In the box too was the little thin sweater that Becky wore that night that had been cut off her when they finally got an ambulance to her. And there were Amy's hair bows that had been on her pigtails when she was thrown into the river, and were later found on the riverbank. And that was the moment when that veil failed me. It fails me now. For me personally, I just didn't understand it. And then years later, when I decided to write about it, it came from a wanting to understand. And the deeper I got into it, the less I understood. Quite different than what I expected. And if you ask me now to explain it all, I have to tell you I can't. I don't know. We can't know. But I know now enough that I can tell you that we shouldn't try to know everything. And we can't. We can't know everything because if you ask the motivation of a couple of sociopathic thugs, the only real answer is that you can never understand the motivations of sociopathic thugs. For a long time, I would, before this book was written, I would say this is about how evil came to my town. It wasn't long, after I started researching, I realized, no, evil didn't come here. It was here already. I don't know that I'll ever do anything more on this. I don't think I will. But if I did, it would be a much more inward-looking thing, in the hopes that I'm looking into, I think, the soul of a community more than myself. I mean, it's just what it is that keeps us talking about this. Why is this still a familiar tale to us? That's something I never successfully answered for myself. I don't know why, except that I think small towns have extremely long memories. If this had happened in Denver, it would have been on the front page for a few days. It might have been the trial coverage, but pretty soon it would have faded away, and we wouldn't even really, there wouldn't be a community-wide recognition or recall the way it is here. And it, as we said, it's fading a little bit too. But I think there will always be a shadow of it out there.
Things haven't changed much here since that night. There is a safety rail to keep people from getting too close, and there's a bench in memory of Becky and Amy. But the bridge remains, and the dark canyon walls and the cold water below haven't changed in 42 years. And somehow, I think they remember.